Hello, and welcome to the Ramp Up to Your Retirement podcast with your host, Dan Reese. Dan, good to be with you again. I know the last time we recorded, you were headed off to a conference. I hope that conference was a successful one.
Yeah, it was fantastic. It was down in Florida, and although we did get rain, it was before all this nasty weather came through. So can't complain about a little rain when you see what people have had to deal with, with these hurricanes.
No. And I've been in Florida a couple of times, and I know that it's rained like crazy, like cats and dogs for 10 minutes, and then all of a sudden it was sunny again. So
Yeah. The humidity kicks in, and it's kind of uncomfortable.
then it gets to be like a little uncomfortable. Yes, indeed. So what are we talking about today?
Yeah, I mean, today I wanted to spend some time just talking about some of the kind of core, we call them blunders, and we actually have a downloadable document that listeners can grab if they want to, after they listen to the show. But really some of the things that people don't always think about when they're coming up on retirement. And those blunders, how it gets, the further you get along in life, the bigger impact blunders can make. And so, you're young, you make blunders like we all do. Yeah. You got plenty of time to kind of maybe overcome them, but not always so much once you get to retirement.
No, when you get to retirement, it's like the money situation is a little bit different. I mean, you have some flexibility, but it is a different kind of animal, definitely in retirement. So let's start with, you and I were talking before the podcast started, and I have to say, number one on the list here is one that I learned early on in corporate America, not in retirement. Don't budget to the dime. You put it a different way, not including extra expenses. So how do you do that? How do you figure that?
Well, I think first of all, everybody or most people want to retire at some point in life, right?
Well, yeah.
And so sometimes we begin to look and go, oh, I can live on some amount of money, right? Whatever it is, I can live on $5,000 a month, right? And that may be the case, and so, like one of the things we always tell people is a good exercise is look at what's being deposited into your account each month. That's a good starting point, and then start adding back in things that maybe you pay for out of your paycheck deductions or things that, like healthcare that you're going to have to pay for separately. But that's a good starting point. But one of the things we know about life is that it's not really that simple, right?
No.
I just got a quote, the roof on our office here needs to be replaced, right?
Okay.
Those are significant expenses. Anybody that's had a roof recently knows that, or maybe a furnace or whatever it might be, or, there's lots of things like that. And so you got to put what we would call fluff into those numbers, right? Because things will inevitably come along that you have to pay for that you don't even think about.
Yeah, I mean, I can see how you would build it in for like utility costs. I can understand that. If you look at your bill and you think, okay, I'm spending $40 a month on net gas, and another $120 on electricity, I can see where you'd kind of fluff those numbers a little bit. But what about the overall situation? I mean, once you've got the kind of comfortable budget laid out there, I mean, do you actually create a category called unanticipated expenses, or you just call it savings, and the goal is to get that savings as large as possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is you're right. You put, like a lot of people have used rules in the past of like, 2% of your home value might be a good starting point for home maintenance. That doesn't mean you have that every year, but over time, it'll kind of, can tend to average that out. So those are good things to start looking at. Hey, let's have a home, maintenance / improvement budget. And then you have to look and go, hey, are there projects that you plan on doing like a bathroom or a kitchen, and, maybe dig into that a little deeper.
Yeah.
Or maybe you've done all those things. So maybe that budget isn't quite as large as what it might be otherwise. Right. And so that's one that, I mean, houses honestly are one of the biggest things that can really put on, like unexpected costs in your face, right?
Yes,
there's no doubt at all. And then other things that people have to think about is, when you do retire, you tend to have more time. So how are you going to fill those hours? Are they going to be things that cost money, right? Are we going to want to travel more? Are we going to want to be more involved? Like maybe we want to join a country club because we want to golf every day, right?
Yeah.
Things that you haven't had before. And all of a sudden you start adding those up, and you know how life is. The little things can add up to a lot really quickly.
Yeah. No, okay. Well, that makes sense. So one of the costs that can add up a lot, and I know this is on the list somewhere, is healthcare cost. Is that a separate blunder, or does that is that a subset of this particular blunder in terms of underestimating?
Yeah, and when we plan with clients, we typically use what most look at and go, that seems like a pretty big number, on healthcare.
Yeah.
The reality is that the numbers are they're pretty well known. If you look at, there's been a lot of research done on healthcare and
Yeah.
retirement. And the other thing that you have to really be aware of with healthcare is that it's going to inflate quicker than other expenses, generally speaking, right?
Yes.
So, like, if you look at, let's say you do get, it's a lot easier once you get to 65 because Medicare is pretty, like you could say, hey, here's my Medicare Part B, here's my supplement or my Advantage plan, whatever it is, and we can get a pretty good idea on that. And with traditional Medicare, the nice thing is that your out of pocket generally isn't too big unless you have long-term care that's not covered, which is a little different topic, right? But even when you have those numbers set, you have to inflate them quicker, right? You have to look at those things growing a lot faster than your regular expenses. And so many times people, because they're used to having that healthcare through work, and not that most people are paying something for that, no
Yeah.
question at all.
Right.
But because it's payroll deducted and it's not coming out of a checking account, they tend to not think about it as much when they get ready to retire.
Yeah.
And it's really important because then you factor in some long-term care, right? And you start looking at options for that. And there are a lot of different ways to attack that. But, everyone should have a long-term care plan one way or another, how that's going to be paid for when or if that does, present itself to a family. But those things, it's just really easy to put off to the side a bit and kind of say, I don't, we'll be fine. Everybody tends to be fine, as opposed to really, noting what that cost is and making sure you understand how it affects your overall cash flow.
Dan, I know that a lot of people probably don't know this if they're not retired, is that Medicare costs money. People think, oh, I get Medicare and it's free. And
That's
that's
right.
not the case, is it?
No, it's not. So there's Part B. So Part A, typically, if you qualify, if you look at the old typical, 40 quarters of work and all these things to qualify for Medicare, Social Security, things like that. Part A is generally free for most people, right?
Yep.
Part B has a premium associated with it, which is around $170 a month right now per person. So if you're married, you got to double that, right? Which is important. And then that can go up from there based on your overall income, right? So if your income gets higher, that can get higher, right?
Yep.
And that's a year-to-year thing that can change. It's not like once it's higher, it stays that way forever. It's based on your income numbers over time. So you have that cost. And then typically, if you're on traditional Medicare, you have a supplement policy, which kind of fills in, people call them Medigaps. There's different terms for them. But in essence, that's covering deductibles and copays and all the things that your regular Medicare doesn't cover, I'm sorry. And then the last thing is Part D, if you're on traditional Medicare, which is your prescription coverage, right?
Yes.
And so that carries an associated premium. And the nice thing about Part D, you do have a lot of flexibility on how, what plans you select. There's a lot of options there.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's one of those things that each year you put in kind of what prescriptions you're taking into a website, and it's going to help you figure out what may be a good plan for you based on your current needs. And obviously, the more needs you have, the more cost that is, right? So if you don't have any prescriptions, you don't really need much, that's going to be pretty inexpensive. But as you need more, that cost is going to go up. So that, and then there's also Medicare Advantage. So there's other plans too that, can be different. But point is like, it's not free. That's the core takeaway.
No, exactly. Don't think you're going to get to retirement and you're going to get free health care. That's not going to happen. I have a story about this next point, Dan, and it's not a good story. And that is, don't forget to account for taxes. Man, oh man. I have a friend of mine who volunteers at an organization to help folks do their taxes. And there was an elderly woman came in, and she put the stuff down on the table in front of him. He was going through it with her. And he said, and there was a big withdrawal from one of her retirement accounts. And he said, "Well, you don't seem to have any taxes here. Is that right? Is there a separate paper here?" And she goes, "No, no, no. My financial advisor said I didn't need to pay any taxes on it."
Mm-hmm.
That's not a story that ended well.
Right.
That is not a story that ended well. Taxes will be with us until we die. They're gonna be there. So how do you do this? How do you account for
Mm-hmm.
taxes? I mean, in that case, it's obvious. There was a withdrawal that should have had taxes withheld and weren't.
Yeah.
But tell us about how do you account for taxes or prepare for them?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, the thing to understand when you get into retirement, first of all, investment planning, retirement planning, tax planning is all connected. It's all
Yes.
connected. There's no way to separate them, right? Anything you do is going to have an impact on all those areas, right? Any decisions you make, any actions you take, right? And so one of the challenges people have is when they are working, it kind of takes care of itself, right? Because most payroll software can estimate what tax you need to pay. Now you can mess it up, right? You can go in and you can make a change and
Oh,
you
yeah.
can you could alter that. But generally speaking, most people file their taxes when they're working. It ends up being pretty close. They might owe a
Yeah.
little bit of money. They might get a little refund, but overall it's pretty close, right?
Yeah.
The problem comes in is when people get into retirement and they have to start actually deciding what tax to withhold. So if they take money, like that example you give, out of a retirement account, how much tax should I withhold? State tax, federal tax, all those things. And the other issue that I will tell you comes along is overall tax planning in retirement, because we've seen it many times where we'll ask people kind of what their plan is as they come in and start doing some retirement planning. And a lot of people say things like, well, you know what? I've got this cash I've saved up. That's going to get me through the first few years. So basically, I don't need anything out of my retirement accounts, for that amount of time. And I'm not even going to have to pay any taxes, right? Well, that's probably not a great idea, because at the end of the day, the more you push off taxes, especially in these tax deferred accounts, the greater your tax bill is likely going to be down the road. And so understanding how to levelize those taxes over retirement so that you can maybe keep more money taxed at the lower rate and not as much tax at the higher rate, right? But generally, it's a lot more complicated. People, they're just not in tune because they haven't had to deal with it. And so you get these surprises, and it happens a lot. They'll go in, and I feel bad for CPAs because they get the tax, they're starting to prepare things, and they're like, am I missing something? Just like your example. And they've got really bad news, because not only do they owe money, but they may have a penalty too, because they didn't pay in enough on time.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's a really, really big thing. And you have to integrate tax planning in with retirement income planning and all that to get a good outcome. If you don't, you're going to have challenges the whole time.
Yeah. Paying taxes is simple. Being prepared to pay taxes it can get a whole lot more complicated.
Right.
What's next on the list?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it comes down to failing to prepare appropriately when you retire early. So, and I'm not talking about the planned retirement. So we have clients that have come to us, they're 55 and we put a plan together and they're in a financial position. It's all planned out. They're in good shape. We've taken in all the contingencies, the extra expenses, the healthcare. And that's one thing to note. The earlier you retire before Medicare, the more you have to plan for healthcare, because of, the issues there can be a little more expensive. But the problem happens when you don't expect to retire and you're forced to retire earlier, right?
Okay.
That's where the real issue comes in, where you just didn't really, you didn't know it was coming, in essence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so,
no, I understand.
Yeah. So when that's the case, you really, really need, in my opinion, the help of a certified financial planner to say, okay, now we really need to make sure we're watching everything closely. We don't have nearly as much room for error, because more than likely your resources could be fine, right? You don't know that. I mean, even if you're forced to retire early, they could be, but you really need to take a close look at that and make sure that you're not missing something and start spending more than what you really can afford to spend, right? And then you get into your 70s and you're broke, and we don't want that for anyone. And so that's a big blunder, is that they get kind of thrown, an unexpected curveball, right? And they just kind of keep living their life like they were, because they don't realize maybe what their resources can truly provide throughout retirement.
Yeah, that's like everybody's really big nightmare, isn't it? To get this, like, you get 77 and you find out, I don't have any, I have very little money left here. Right? That's like,
Yeah.
that is terrible. So that's a blunder that's easy to understand and an easy one to prepare for. What is next?
Oh, the next one, I don't. It's not super easy to prepare for, and it's really unexpectedly having to help out loved ones, right?
Oh,
And
yes.
you know, and I know you've heard the term sandwich generation, right? I
Yep.
mean, you got parents that are living that you have to help support possibly based on needing care and support there. And then you have kids that you're still helping to support, whether that's getting into your college or, hopefully they're not in your basement. Hopefully they're, out on their own. But unfortunately, it does happen, right? So
It
that's a
does.
reality. And so many times you're in your prime earning years where it should be your prime opportunity to, save money, but you're actually
Yeah.
end up having to spend more, and then you walk into retirement and that doesn't just stop. You know what I mean? That'll continue oftentimes.
Sure.
And so understanding what's reasonable, what's that contingency fund, and what that comes down to honestly is to like looking at your family tree, right? And like that's one of the things that, matter of fact, I'm pretty excited that this one software that we use that kind of helps lay out someone's like financial position, like their assets, their income, all these different things visually, which is a great tool. They
Yeah.
are just adding in kind of what you would call the family tree part of it, where it allows you to like lay out, all your family, like parents, anybody that, and then to
Mm,
really document, what kind of situation are they in? Could they need help? So
yeah.
it's all on the forefront because that family planning piece of it can be really massive to how you spend your money in retirement. You know what I'm saying?
No, no, I know what you're saying, and it's. I was very fortunate, um, but I am aware of folks who have the parents who are elderly who are not in either the best physical shape nor fiscal shape. So it becomes a big issue. It becomes a difficult one to deal with because you're like, okay, we have to step in here. We have to have family conference. we, you know,
Right.
our folks, all the siblings going to chip in the equal amount, or some make more? Are they going to chip in more? Yeah, no, that's a difficult one. That is a difficult one. And of course, who doesn't want to help their kids? I mean,
That's yeah, and I mean 100% when you see somebody struggling, it's like, hey, if I can do something, I want to be able to do something. And what the hardest part is, honestly, we see it quite frequently, is that a lot of our clients, as they get older, have a desire to help grandkids with like education costs and things like that. And so all of a sudden, maybe their biggest desire, they're not able to really fulfill
no,
because there were these other things. They didn't really think about it and plan for it and all that other stuff. And if they look back, like, hindsight's 2020, as we all know, and they're like, oh, I would have done that different if I would have known this, right? So it's just putting that at top of mind awareness that that's a reality. Like the possibility of needing to help with parents or kids is real, right?
yep,
So put that out there, put that into your plan, be aware of it, because a lot of these things, Bill, are about awareness. You know what I mean? It's like, hey,
yes,
because as you're making
yeah,
decisions, you like when you're aware of all these things, then when you make other decisions, they're there. They're in the back of your mind. You're like, oh, you know
right.
what? But we got to remember this. And so it could alter slightly some of the decisions you make with your money.
No, no, and I think that's a good way to put it. Is just put it in your awareness zone, as it were, because the saying, right? Men plan, God laughs. You know, it's the idea that we as human beings don't we limit our focus, and life is not like that. Life's got all kinds of all kinds of squirrely things it throws your way. So
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, no, it is just so true. This next one though, this is one I don't think a lot of people want to. I don't think they want to think about, in my
Right.
experience, and that is be aware of your longevity. Dan, I know
Yes.
some people. I look at their families, and I look at I'm like, every one of your relatives are all in their mid 90s, upper 90s. I even know my wife has an aunt who is 102. as they say, past success is no guarantee of future performance in your industry,
Yeah,
right?
right,
Still,
right.
you can't ignore the fact that it's like, holy cow, man! I've got a lot of relatives that live well into their 90s.
Yeah, yeah. I think, and that is a huge, determinant. I mean,
Yeah,
of how long you may live. There's no doubt. It's not a guarantee. There are no guarantees, right? I mean, and it works the other way too. Just because your family didn't live a long time doesn't mean you won't. Like I always use an example. Both of my grandpas died, like I think they were both in their upper 60s, but they would not have died with the technology that's around today, right?
mm,
So they were both heart issues that would have been identified and would have been corrected. And
hmm
and so, like, as an example, my dad and my mom, they're both 88 years old. Or my mom, it actually has a birthday coming up end of October. But point is, I don't know how long they'll live, but they have longevity and are fairly healthy. And that doesn't mean I'm going to live a long time or not. But what I'm getting at is that understanding that the way the world is today with medical technology, people are living longer, and you need to plan for that. Now, the one good thing is generally speaking, regular living expenses do decrease as you get older because you don't go as much, right? I mean, people just don't move. Like my mom and dad don't spend a lot of like money day to day on like going out to eat and all these other things that maybe you did more of when you were younger.
yeah, hmm
But on the flip side, costs tend to increase on things like like mowing the grass, or doing chores around the house that maybe they're not able to do as much as they used to, right?
yeah. Good point.
And then of course, yeah, and then healthcare and different things like that. So the biggest point is that don't say, oh, I'm probably only gonna live till 75, because you just don't know, and you've got to plan. And the good thing nowadays, there's different tools, like financial tools, that are starting to come up, and I think they've actually been around a while. Things that are called like a longevity annuity, which is actually something designed for if you live a long time. Like, it actually pays out down the road. You know what I mean? If you get to a certain age, then it starts paying out. Versus, like a traditional, annuity where people think of where they start getting paid right away, right? And so it's interesting. There's things that are coming about, but go back to awareness. Just be aware that it's likely you're going to live longer than you think you are.
Okay, Social Security, the third rail of politics, the beast in the room. And what do you have to say about Social Security?
Yeah, I think first of all is that it is a fantastic resource. And like my biggest advice is handle with care. And what I mean by that is that a lot of times people get excited. They turn 62 and like, oh, I can get my Social Security. They run right out and they make that choice, right? You got to really take your time. You have to see how it integrates with your overall plan, with your overall resources, because many times, and we've got lots of examples to show through the years, you're better off waiting some on Social Security. And the reason is that there's a lot of factors that go into it, but there's a lot of advanced financial planning software that will show you your odds of success when you put in all your resources, you put in your income needs and all your spending, and then you delay Social Security versus, starting it earlier. And
Yep.
pretty much almost always your odds of success go up the longer you put off Social Security. Now, that's not for everybody. Obviously, every single person out there has unique circumstances. And this isn't advice. This is just telling you that you got to pay attention to it. You have to see what your situation looks like. Is it best for you to take it early, late, somewhere in between? And same thing when you're married, all those choices are, multiplied, because you've got two choices to make, right? And those choices are often different. It might be one person, they're better off, waiting a little longer, another person taking it earlier.
Yeah.
But the big blunder people make is that they rely so much on it right away, and it ends up haunting them down the road because they didn't really take an integrated approach of deciding how to use it. Because I'll tell you flat out, for most people, Social Security on its own is not going to pay the bills. You know what I mean? You've got to have other resources, and if you think that is it, then you really need to start taking a closer look and looking at your savings plan and making sure you have other resources available to help supplement that, because it's a great benefit. It's fantastic in many, many regards. I think we're very lucky as Americans to have it, honestly. If you look at the benefit you get out of it for what you put in, it's tremendous. But the fact of the matter is you have to be educated on it, and you have to know, what's the best way for you to use it in your particular circumstances.
This goes to a little pet peeve of mine, which is, and it goes back to my career as a business and financial news journalist. Most people are not very financially literate or aware. And, I think that it's a sad fact that most people are undersaved for retirement.
Right.
And they do think, oh, Social Security is going to bail me out. It won't bail you out. It will be a good helping hand. Like you said, but people just need to think that it's not going to be enough. It just, that's not going to get it done for you unless, you're content with a very, 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 very simple lifestyle.
Yep.
It's not going to take care of it. Okay. Well, we've gone through quite a few of blunders that people make and the things that people can, if they're aware of, can fix. What's the final one on the list?
Required minimum distributions, not understanding them. And it's confusing. And it like every client, we go through and spend time explaining how it works, how they're calculated, when you have to take them, all that good stuff. But the big thing, that's all fine. And that's all can be learned fairly quickly, honestly.
Yeah.
Like that stuff. The problem that people have is they don't look long-term when they retire. That example I gave earlier about somebody maybe saying, hey, we're going to live off our cash for a few years and we won't have any taxes. It's going to be great, and all that stuff. Well, what happens so many times when people don't actively do tax planning and actively manage their earned income, if you will, their taxable income throughout their first year retirement all the way through, what happens is all this money builds in these pre-tax accounts that have not been taxed yet. And then you get to 72, 73, 74, depending on when you were born. And you start having to pull out these distributions. And oftentimes you have full Social Security then. You might have some other things happening, maybe a pension. And now all of a sudden your tax rate is much higher than what you anticipated because of these forced distributions.
No.
And so we always encourage people, let's look at if you do nothing or if you follow that plan of kind of living off and not paying any taxes early, living off maybe savings. And then let's compare it with if we're more proactive about it. And if we maybe take and we do some Roth conversions, or we maybe take some income out of those pre-tax accounts early on in retirement more than what you would have, on your initial plan, and see how that affects your long-term required distributions, how it affects your long-term tax rates. But the tough thing is once you get to that age and you have to take them, there's not a lot you can do. You know what I mean? You're kind of like, okay, now we've got an issue, right?
It's not an issue, really. You just have to pay the taxes. I mean,
Well, yeah. And it can have some unintended consequences. We talked briefly about Medicare and Medicare premiums.
Yeah.
That if your income gets too high because you have these big required distributions, you can get that additional premium due on your Medicare. And that can get significant. And when you're married, remember, that's on two of you, right? So like any of those increases apply to both spouses. So just kind of a closing message on that is that all these things you have to be aware of. And like I say, I think I mentioned at the beginning, we've got in the show notes on the podcast, you can actually get to this report and download it and kind of see these 8 different items that we discussed just for your records. But the point is that they're all kind of intertwined too. That's the big thing is like we always try to kind of teach clients that, hey, all these issues that exist, it'd be nice if you could just take them all as one-offs and be like, oh, I'm just going to deal with this, right? And then everything will be good. Well, unfortunately, with money, everything's connected. You do this, it affects that, and, vice versa. And so that's where we just are big proponents of finding a good certified financial planner to help you with these decisions so that you've got a fiduciary that's on your side, helping you think these things through. Because a lot of it is awareness, like we talked about. It's like just understanding them so that there aren't surprises, because if you can avoid surprises, most people's quality of life's a little better. I mean, good surprises are fun, like a new grandkid or something like that. Bad surprises, not so much, where you go get your taxes done and all of a sudden you owe all this extra money.
And you're like, wait a minute. No. That's true. For folks who are listening to the podcast, Dan, and are thinking you might be somebody they want to maybe have an initial conversation with, or maybe longer conversations. What's the best way for them to get a hold of you and reach out to you?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I always recommend is our website's great. We have under our Insights tab, we have a lot of great information on these issues and a lot of great articles, different reports you can download. If you're just starting to try to learn, I think that's a really good place to start. We also have a couple of really good, we call them calculators, like risk management, like kind of how much risk, 401k calculators, retirement readiness quizzes, things like that. But ultimately, if you want to just talk and have questions, you can always call our office. It's 517-783-1695. And you can also just reach out on the website. We've got a contact us button. You fill in a little form. We'll reach out to you, get those questions answered. The big thing is to raise your hand because, I always say it's really dangerous sometimes going out on Google and trying to get answers on finances because you're going to get a lot of stuff, that's for sure, but it's not always really good information. But, if you reach out, we'll be happy to, at least get you pointed in the right direction or see if there's ways that we can help you as well.
Yeah. And it is okay to Google stuff. It's okay to look at stuff, but you should remember when you're looking at all that information, you might need somebody to help you sort through a lot of the things that you discover. So just if you're listening to this, keep that in mind. Dan is a possible resource for you. The other thing I would ask that you do is if you're not a regular subscriber, you're not subscribed to the podcast, just subscribe. Hit the follow button. That way, every time Dan drops a new episode of the podcast, you're notified. You can give it a listen. And I will also add that if you like the podcast, share it with people. Tell people about it. Do you find it useful? You find it helpful? Word of mouth promotion is very welcome here, and we would thank you for it, as a matter of fact. Until next time, I'm Bill Tucker. On behalf of Dan and everybody at Avery Wealth, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen today and to remind you that you can go out today and make today a great day or not. It's your choice. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time. Thank you for listening to Ramp Up Your Retirement. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Visit our website at www.averywealth.com or give us a call at 517-783-1695. And don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Avery Wealth. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.